Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So after President Biden's visit with NATO leaders, he emerged to declare to the press and thus the Western world that if Russia uses chemical weapons, there will be a U.S. response.
Yeah, that he's going to respond in kind.
On chemical weapons. If chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, would that trigger a military response from NATO?
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, but we'd make that decision at the time.
What does a response in kind mean? I mean, normally that means we would respond at the same level. So if Russia uses chemical weapons, we're going to use chemical weapons. What is a response in kind? That needs a little bit more definition. But the larger point, or the larger question, I suppose, are the drums of war being beaten louder, or is it just my finely tuned hearing? To help us with that question, we're pleased to be joined by Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Times. Cliff, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Amy, good to be with you.
So respond in kind, and this after a week where we've seen Annie Applebaum and writing in The Atlantic, Ukraine must win. David Frum in The Atlantic, Ukraine is a country worth fighting for, talking to America. The editorial board of the Wall Street Journal opining Ukraine can win with enough help. Are we being drawn more deeply into this?
Look, I don't normally agree with Ann Applebaum and David Frum on these things. I probably do here. I don't know that we're being drawn in. I think we are perhaps recognizing the importance of what's going on and beginning to connect the dots in terms of what's going on. Ukraine is not a NATO member, so we're not going to fight for Ukraine on the ground. But this is an independent, sovereign nation that identifies with Europe, identifies with the West, and you now have Putin waging a barbaric, imperialist war of aggression. There's no question about that. And he is waging that war against innocent men, women, and children. He is reducing cities to rubble. I don't think we can say, too bad for them. We have nothing to say about that. It's nowhere close to home. Do not think that if Putin wins here, that will be the extent of his ambitions. We need to understand who he is, what he wants, who his allies are, and I particularly mean Xi Jinping and Ayatollah Khamenei and Kim Jong-un, and I mean Maduro of Venezuela, and what they want to do in the world and why this is a step along the line.
So then
let's start there.
So if he uses chemical weapons, I mean, because I know all these hypotheticals, the media loves. Jon Stewart actually made this point of all people, but I agree with him. The media loves to use hypotheticals that are always trying to advance a deeper engagement, more military response from the United States. You heard it again there in that clip with Biden. So if he were to use chemical weapons, and based on what you've just said about the situation, then what should the United States response be?
Well, first of all, I don't know what Biden meant by saying respond in kind. I'm not sure Biden knew what he meant by respond in kind. Respond in kind means, well, he uses chemical weapons, we'll use chemical weapons. Well, I don't think we're going to use chemical weapons. I think it's important to understand that this is becomes another terrible war crime that will be committed. We had a war crime like this committed in Syria a few years ago. Obama said, I'm not going to let that pass. I'm at least going to punish Assad and hurt him. And then he decided not to. And he decided not to partly because the Russians said, hey, you can count on us. We'll help get rid of Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons. How about that? Oh, great idea. And, of course, they didn't. We have to understand, look, right now we have in effect, Cold War II. And it's like Cold War I, except the Russians are the junior partners to the Chinese rather than the other way around. And Putin wants to take over his part of the world, Eastern Europe at least, and restore the Russian Empire. And Xi wants to take over Taiwan and take over Asia. And in time, they want to take over the globe. They want this to be a globe dominated by authoritarians and axis of tyrants. And we have to understand that if we sit back and say, hey, has nothing to do with us, well, then
okay,
we really lack
okay, but Cliff, I didn't hear a response. I mean, you're talking about Ukraine can win, Ukraine must win.
So what we should do. We should
Yeah.
have started doing about a year ago, at least. Maybe actually, I would say we should have started doing in 2008 after Putin took 2 provinces away from Georgia, or certainly 2014 when he took Crimea and invaded Donbass. Get all the weapons you can into this nation. They have the right to have any weapons we want to give them and give them. They have done much better than most people thought. They have if they continue to inflict the kind of damage they've been inflicting, Putin may. Now it's a little hard to talk about Putin's psychology, though I'm happy to try. Putin may say, "Okay, this is not going well for me. I am losing to the damn Ukrainians. My economy is going to be in depression for years now. Let me make a deal. Let me get what they call a diplomatic solution." And that might entail, for example, Zelensky saying,
carving it up.
He actually already has,
Yeah.
"I won't join NATO."
Yeah.
Okay, that's giving up watermelon for Lent. He wasn't getting into NATO anyhow. But it has to mean his troops leave. Does he keep Crimea? Yeah, he probably does. That's too bad. But I don't see any way for the Ukrainians to get him out of Crimea at this point. There may be some other things Zelensky can give up. That certainly would be nice.
Well,
there are other
let me ask this.
outcomes.
So let me ask this another way: is there any circumstance, in your view, in which the United States should send in ground troops, should essentially declare war on Russia through the enforcement of no-fly zone? I don't know. Airstrikes on Moscow. Yeah. Is there any situation, if Putin's invasion is limited to Ukraine, where you see the United States going to war with Russia formally?
No, not unless Putin decides he wants to go formally to war with us, which is a possibility. And he could do that. He could attack us directly or attack a NATO member directly, and then we would be at war with him. That is a possibility. I can tell you why. But no, I don't see that. We have left this country out. We help it defend itself. If it can defend itself, that's something to be cheered. If it can't, that's a sad and terrible thing. But then do not let this axis of tyrants continue their march towards global domination.
Now, 3 days after invading Ukraine, though, Putin put his nuclear forces on alert. Was that just a scare tactic or a bunch of barking?
It was a scare tactic. It was to say, listen, guys, I'm not afraid of a nuclear exchange. You are. So I deter you. You don't deter me. Understood? That's what it was. Keep in mind, during the Cold War, we had a principle called MAD, mutually assured destruction. The idea was that any nuclear exchange would be a lose-lose proposition. We left ourselves vulnerable, literally vulnerable to the Russians, and they to us. It would make sense for neither to have a first strike. It made sense during the Cold War because, and I say this as somebody who started going to the Soviet Union more than 50 years ago, when as an exchange student, when as a journalist, the Russians in the Kremlin were evil, but they were rational. They remembered the horrors of World War II, and they didn't want a nuclear exchange. So it worked. It doesn't necessarily work with Putin, who is very different than he's a Stalinist, but he's not a Leninist. He's not a Marxist. Listen, here's who he is. He thinks of himself as Russia's czar.
Yeah.
And his mission as czar is to restore the Russian Empire as it used to be, and then to expand it. That's what he wants to do. And this is very tied up with him personally, so he can't. So one thing we have to understand from this going forward, since our policies up to now have been abysmal, is that mutually assured destruction is not, and Reagan knew this way back when. That's why he had Star Wars, as it was called. They called it that because they said, "Oh, you can't hit a bullet with a bullet." We need missile defense, and we need the ability to deter our enemies. What does that require? It means you have the capability to beat them, and they know that, and the will to use the weapons you have, and they know that. And so challenging you is a very bad idea. So it's telling our enemies this will not be a fair fight. We have not been doing that. We have only been lowering our capability by lowering our defense budgets, by lowering the number of troops we have in Europe, by weakening NATO over the years. That's what's been going on. We have to get back to deterrence so our enemies don't think they can take advantage of us. And we have to stop being so stupid as we are now. As we're in this battle with Russia, it is a Russian envoy of Putin who is the honest broker, quote unquote, in Vienna, on this deal we're about to make to give billions of dollars to a regime dedicated to death to America. Not smart.
Right. Yeah. So the whole Iranian thing, right? It's as I've said before, it's like a Peter Sellers movie. But here, I want to go back though. Where do you think things are with Ukraine and Russia? We hear a lot of analysts saying stalemate. We talked to Jim Carafano earlier this week, as you know, from the Heritage Foundation. He said stalemate's possible that Ukraine could repel this invasion. And I offered an argument that was made by your colleague at Foundation for Defense of Democracy, Bill Roggio, who over the weekend wrote in Daily Mail that basically, while Zelensky is winning the information war because of Western media, Putin is winning the ground war, and the indication was there isn't much chance medium term for Zelensky to hold Ukraine. So a lot of different assessments, and I understand these are complicated assessments to make, but what's yours as we stand here today?
So it's a lot. You're absolutely right. Different assessments by smart people trying to figure out. I think at this point, look, the Blitz Creed that Putin had in mind, taking the country quickly, with plenty of Ukrainians saying, yes, we want to be ruled by the Kremlin. Yes, we think of ourselves as Russians. That didn't happen. His response to that has been to raise cities to the ground. That to do in places like Mariupol on the water on the south, somewhat to my amazement, what he did to Grozny, a city of Chechens, what he did to Aleppo, a city of Syrians, he's doing now to people that he says, these are my people. We're single people. These are my Russian brothers. If he is having terrible trouble taking Kyiv, but he can use missiles and make Kiev a city of rubble and absolutely destroy it. I've been there many times. Terrible thing to do to a beautiful city like Kyiv. He could be that awful as to do that. But that's the way he wins. The way he wins is not that this country submits to him. Yeah, because the mood was set by Zelensky early on. The U.S. said, "Hey, we'll fly you out. You can set up, a government in exile in Brussels or London or Latvia or something. How about that?" And he said, "I don't need a ride. I need ammunition." And they have done much better than any of the experts I know, pretty much, thought they would. Although in the first column I wrote about this, I suggested it might be the case. I was reminded of the 1939 war between Russia and the Finns. And there was a Finnish soldier who said, "We are such a tiny country, and there are so many of them. Where will we bury them all?" I understood that Ukrainians believe that in their bones that they are a nation, they have independence, they have sovereignty, they don't want to be conquered, occupied, and erased from the map. I have great sympathy for them. Does that mean I want us to go in and fight this war for them? It does not. I don't think on a geostrategic level it's the right thing to do, even though I think it shouldn't have come about and never would have if we hadn't been feckless after the slicing up of Georgia in 2008 and the slicing up of Ukraine in 2014, and then we were resetting relations with them and going to their Olympics and then President Biden last year says, "Oh, I'm going to bless the Nord Stream pipeline for nothing in return. Oh, I don't want to provoke Putin, so I'm not going to send any good weapons to Ukraine when they're asking for it as the Russians are there."
But
I got a personal interest. I got a personal interest in this. My son is a Ranger Tab paratrooper serving in Latvia right now because that's a NATO country. Watching that border. But if Putin wins and thinks he wins, he moves on from here because he wants to reestablish the power of Russia.
And so, what do you think happens one way or the other in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months?
I don't have a crystal ball. Predictions, as Yogi Berra said, are hard to make, especially about the future. There's all kinds of new variables that can be added in. The kinds of weapons that Putin uses, other things, which tactics he decides. Does he attempt to occupy Kiev, or does he knock it down to rubble? If he attempts to occupy it, it's going to be hard because he's going to be fighting street to street urban warfare, and his troops don't know that city the way the Ukrainians do. How soon does spring come in? Because when the mud season hits, the tanks can't go off the road. They'll get stuck in the mud. That'll be very helpful. How many weapons do we get in? They need hundreds of drones, javelins, SAMs, all other kinds of weapons to keep the stalemate up. Does Putin say this is only going to get worse? And if so, what do I do about it? Too many variables. You can guess, but you can't really predict with any assurance.
All right,
What I do think we have to understand is this is Cold War II that has begun. This is a little like the Korean War. We fought the Korean War ourselves and saved the South from being swallowed by the communist regimes, China and Russia. And that was probably a useful thing to do. We're not going to do it this time, and it gets back to what you said in the beginning of this conversation. Nuclear weapons. We are not going to be in this war unless Putin absolutely forces the issue.
He is Cliff May, president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Times. Cliff, thanks as always.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Annie.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule.